My name is Randy Mabe, and I am professionally employed as a real estate appraiser. And due to some nomenclature issues with the Quatrain 2-62, or Nostradamus Quatrain that's normally called the Mabus Quatrain, due to some nomenclature issues with that quatrain and my studies into astrotheology, I combined the study of astrotheology and an investigation of the quatrains of Nostradamus and the pictures from the Lost Book of Nostradamus, and have come to the conclusion, or have the theory, that Nostradamus is an astrotheologist, and that with the quatrains and the pictures from the Lost Book of Nostradamus, we can figure out the secret allegorical or occult meanings of the biblical narrative.
Okay, right now the ad hominem attacks are flying at you from the audience. You know, they're name calling at you, they want to call you crazy, all the different things that they're going to associate with Nostradamus and anything associated with astrotheology, the so-called debunkers out there who try to debunk works that they've never even studied. And so what do you have to say to all of that?
To that I would say pause the video and go outside at night, and we're putting this as a New Year's Nostradamus celebration, and the reason we're using this time of the year to debunk those people that are saying astrotheology is bunk or bullshit is because from this time until April, you can walk outside and you can see the very cross that Jesus is crucified on, at least astrologically. And there's also the cross is connected to a triangle, and the triangle makes Skull Hill. Now you can walk outside and see that for your eyes. If you want to see how the allegory works, the best thing to do is get yourself a planisphere, and the ones that we use are The Night Sky by David Chandler for use in 30 to 40 degrees north latitude. And you can pick that up at Amazon.com for your verification. And we do recommend the plastic ones that you can write on, as we're doing here in this video. Sure. And so basically, after watching videos like the Pharmacratic Inquisition and Zeitgeist, and reading books by Jan Irvin, Acharya S., and studying astrotheology, there's this cross up in the sky that's connected by a triangle, and I just happen to be looking at that for about 3 or 4 months out of the year as I sit in the jacuzzi. And so after all of this time looking at this stuff, you decided that astrotheology was complete nonsense. Is that correct? That is utterly, completely wrong. Utterly, completely wrong. Okay. Utterly, completely wrong. The more I study it, and I've been studying this for about 4 years now, every day that I want to sit down and try to figure something out, I'm able to figure out a new allegory or see a new piece of the puzzle come together. So my investigation would say that yourself and people like Peter Joseph and anybody, you know, like Acharya S., they're on the right track. They just haven't discovered all the details of how the biblical narrative works. And the reason that most people that study this haven't figured it out is because the key to understanding the astrological allegories is dialing your planisphere into the astronomy of December 21st, 2012. And once you do that, you sit there and realize that this right here, right there, that's the astronomy of the flood story, it's the astronomy of the birth narratives, it's the astronomy of the crucifixion, and it's the astronomy of David and Goliath. So all of these things we're going to be talking about, and I'm going to show you how either the pictures of the Lost Book of Nostradamus support the idea that I'm going to put forth, or I'll show you how the quatrains of Nostradamus support the idea that I'm going to put forth, and that they're all one and the same. And the key to understanding that is, if you think of Jesus, when he's talking about who he is, he says, I am that which is, I am that which was, I am that which is to come. So when he's talking about I am that which is in the context of sun worship and astrology, he's Pisces. He's the Jesus fish, Ichthys. That's when he's saying I am that which is. When he says I am that which was, that's when he's Aries, the Lamb of God. When he says, I am that which is to come, that's the next age in the future. That's Aquarius, the man with the water pitcher, or the Son of Man. So we can see he's the Lamb of God, he's the Son of Man. Now, if you want to get really wicked into mysticism or whatever and say, how is it that we know he's Pisces? He doesn't ever go in the Bible and say, I'm a fish. He says, I'm the Lamb of God. He says, I'm the Son of Man. You have to look at the birth narrative, and it's going to tell you who he is. And the key to understanding that he's the fish is the virgin birth. Because the virgin birth is a fish birth. The female comes along, she lays her eggs, she leaves the scene, the man comes along and sprays upon the Holy Ghost. So he inseminates the eggs and then he leaves. It's a virgin birth impregnated by his sperm. And if you think of the Holy Ghost as a wad of sperm, a ghost, that's a way to explain what's going on there. So that's how I tie it in. Everything that I look in the Bible, I look for clues. So I'm sitting there saying, if he says, I am the first and I am the last, or I am the Alpha and the Omega, well, that's just sitting there saying, okay, he's the Lamb of God. That's the first house of the zodiac. So that's the Alpha. You go all the way around, well, Pisces is the last. So he's Aries and he's Pisces. He's the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the last. Pisces is the 12th house of the zodiac. So when I'm looking at the story, I don't give it any credence to have any historical value whatsoever, other than the clues of, well, when was he born? The clue is King Herod, who dies in 4 BC, and the other clue is from the birth narrative of Luke, where it's Quirinius as governor, which is 6 and 7 AD, and we'll talk about why that's different, and I'll show you the astrological significance of that. So I don't look at the Bible that it has anything historical value. I'm only looking at the astrological allegories in the Bible, and everything is a clue, including the numbers. And when I say the numbers, I mean the number code to the Bible, or the chapter and verse of the Bible. And with that, because this is a Nostradamus presentation, I'm looking at the chapter and the verse of the Bible, or the New Testament anyways, from the eyes of Nostradamus. And the importance of noting that is that the chapter and verse of the Bible wasn't put in the Bible till Nostradamus' time.
Who was Nostradamus?
Nostradamus is a 16th century physician, astrologer, and some people think that he was a prophet that was able to see into the future.
What was his background?
His background was his ancestors are Jewish, and they're were forced to convert to Christianity due to the Inquisition. They changed their name to Nostradamus so they would have a more Christian-sounding name.
Do you know what their original family name was?
I believe his grandfather was Guy Gassonet, or something to that effect. And and it's believed that one of his grandfathers taught him astrology and gave him an astrolabe. So he may or may not have learned a lot of this mysticism, or what I'll say astrotheology. He was a contemporary of Julius Caesar Scaliger, and he was an apprentice, if you will, with Scaliger. So Nostradamus always wanted to be a physician. He never really completed, to the best of my knowledge, never completed med school. But he did apprentice, if you want to call that, with Scaliger, who was a physician. But something tells me that Scaliger was a little bit more than just a physician, and I would think that Scaliger probably knew of some of these astrological ideas that we'll be talking about. He might have learned from him.
All right, and so how did you originally get interested into Nostradamus in the first place?
Basically, I'd back up and say, how did I get interested in astrotheology? And that was basically watching the Zeitgeist movie. And, of course, anybody that's seen the Zeitgeist movie...
And that's Zeitgeist Part 1 that came out in 2007.
Correct. Zeitgeist Part 1 that deals with religion and talks about astrotheology.
Now, let me just state that a lot of people have attacked Zeitgeist Part 1, and I've had Acharya S. on my show that's done a lot of research. And I'll say straight out that 99+% of the attacks I've ever heard against Acharya's work are from people who have never actually read her work and looked at the citations. And I myself have published primary citations from Astrotheology, and it goes far beyond Madame Blavatsky in the 18th century. And so, we want to go into this history and, show this. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, well, to feed off of what you just talked about is Madame Blavatsky and the ideas coming from the 18th century.
Actually, 19th
century, yeah, 1800s.
Right.
Okay, well, if we look at Nostradamus' work as being astrological astrotheology work, then we backdate that idea. So we backdate this to the 1500s. Now, the thing I'd like to point out is like, well, why in the 1500s do we not know these guys are astrotheologists and this is what they're talking about and they have the same ideas? Is because they would kill them with the Inquisition. So when we look at, say, Blavatsky,
you would just hide it further and further and further down in allegories so that you didn't get killed. So by Blavatsky's time, there's no more Inquisition, and now they're just putting it in your face.
Right, they can bring it public and not fear of death, but in Nostradamus' time, it was fear of death or fear of the Inquisition, so the information's coded. And it's coded not only in the quatrains, but it's coded in the pictures of the Lost Book of Nostradamus. Now, going back to the idea of 2012, 2012 reveals all these allegories. It's the astronomy, and I mean the detailed astronomy. We're going to look at the stars, but we're going to talk about the moon cycles of December 21st, 2012, or right before, so that we can see a complete picture of what's going on. So because this astronomy's past, if I say, well, it was the first quarter moon on December 20th, well, they calculated that out mathematically to perfection. But we can just simply Google it and say, where was the moon on December 20th, 2012? And we can find out. And it turns out it's the first quarter moon, and when we get to that part of the presentation, I'll show you how it fits the biblical narrative. Because not only do the stars fit the biblical narrative, the moon cycles, you're going to sit there and say, this guy's trying to tell me that the biblical story is based upon December 21st, 2012. That's complete malarkey, but as I sit here and detail everything out, I'm sitting here going, it's the most famous astronomy ever. And we look at, say, like the Epic of Gilgamesh, because we're going to talk about the flood. Well, if you look at the flood story, and you go back to the Epic of Gilgamesh, you're 2500 BC plus or minus a couple hundred years.
And everybody says, well, this is proof that the flood really happened because it's in every culture. They all talk about it.
Right. The flood must have happened because every culture's looking at it.
Right.
Well, I'm going to show you the flood's an astrological allegory, and then when you sit back and say, wait a minute, every one of these sun-worshipping cultures that knew beans about astronomy have the same damn flood story, and we're going to see that even Nostradamus is coded in the quatrains that he's talking about this flood story. So when I tell you that it's December 21st, 2012, I'm going to over and over again say, well, we're going to go back to the planisphere and look at the astronomy of December 21st, 2012, and then scratch your head that I'm able to tell these as allegories like I'm reading a children's book. Like, here you go, children. Here's the ship. It's Gemini. It's floating in the Milky Way, and it's the Milky Way that's flooding the horizon. It's not
and so,
a real
why don't
incident.
you just point this out right here on the planisphere?
Okay, if we could clean this one off, and I'll highlight the things. I'm going to first look on this side, and we're going to see the crow, and that's Corvus. So we'll look on the south side of a planisphere, and what you'll notice is, first of all, we're dialed in at December 21st, 2012. So that's where our arrow is on December 21st. And for all practical purposes, this is the astronomy of December 21st, 2012. What you'll see is the Milky Way is flooding the horizon. And here's Corvus. That's the crow that Noah's going to send out. You can look in Richard Hinckley Allen's book on Corvus, and he'll say right in there it's Noah's crow. So we have the flood on the south horizon. We turn the planisphere over, and now we've got the flood also on the north horizon. Okay, and we still have Corvus. He's up here high in the sky so that he can see the horizon to see if it's flooded or not. And then we're gonna look at The coordinates. Well, the reason I said coordinates is because if we go right here at 30 degrees and right here at 50 and intersect, we arrive at Gemini. So Gemini is partially floating in the Milky Way, and it's mostly floating above, just like a ship. Noah's Ark, it's going to be Castor and Pollux are the twins, so we have two of everything. And it says that God is floating on the water, so we have God. This is Ophiuchus. That's going to be the house of God. In this presentation, when we say Jesus dies on a cross, placed in a tomb, he's going to be placed in the tomb right here of Ophiuchus, the coffin. And then the mountain that the ark, Gemini, comes to rest upon is the winter triangle, which is the stars Betelgeuse, Sirius, and Procyon. So to make a mountain out of stars, you use a triangle. And let's see, what else do we have going on here? Oh, the other specification for Noah's Ark is 300. So 30 by 50 by 300. The 300 part is the age of Aquarius. When the sun is in the sign of Aquarius at the vernal equinox, it's 300 celestial degrees of longitude. Now we can look at the quatrains of Nostradamus to see if he's talking about this particular story.
Let me just ask you a quick question here. Why do you think ancient societies placed so much emphasis on studying the stars and creating these allegorical stories?
You know, I study it just purely like as where this stuff is. I think we can look back at the ancient cultures primarily needing it for agricultural purposes, and timing of the seasons would be the most important. Just
right, so that they would just have intricate stories that they could embellish upon, so that they could teach, their children these stories. And I suppose if you had 100 different ways of telling the same story, they would eventually get it. Right.
And it would be a way for you to memorize. Okay, these things are happening in the stars.
Okay, here's the sea, and here's the flood, and here's the ship, and here's the coffin, and all of this stuff.
Well, I think at this point it would be just a little bit more. I look at these things as mystery school religions based on sun worship and astrology. So if you look at the ancient mystery schools, you have the initiated who are told the internal story, the secret occult meanings of stories, and then you have the non-initiated member who is told
the campfire version,
the warm and fuzzy version, but underneath that outside story, inside is a hidden secret story that only the initiates, the initiated. And if you read the Bible, you'll sit there and see that here's Jesus saying, well, to the public, to the crowds, I speak in parables, but to you I teach another meaning. So right there in the Bible, you kind of get this idea, well, wait a minute, there's two stories going on here.
Yeah, of course.
Now, if we were to...
And then everybody sits there and tells you that it's a literal argument.
Right. So one way to demonstrate the idea that the Bible is two different stories would be if we were to look at Lost Book image number 3. So if we look at the Lost Book of Nostradamus, image number 3, okay, so upper left-hand corner there. If we look at that image, what we see is it looks like a sage or a preacher or a priest, and there's 4 characters to the right and another 4 characters to the left. Now they're both reading, say, a Bible or some scripture, but what you notice is the characters on the right all have a veil on. And if we look to the characters to the left, those characters are unveiled. So the allegory of what symbolism that I'm seeing here is there's 2 stories. There's one that's veiled, and then there's another one that's unveiled. And as far as I can tell, everything, at least when I look at any number, I always think if there's a number code, if there's something being told in the numbers that we need to have deeper meaning in, that particular picture is number 3. So what we're going to unveil in this presentation, or what I think Nostradamus is unveiling, and why I'm sitting here with Jan Irvin, is there's 3 different characters that represent Jesus, or 3 different symbols. So Jesus is the sun that goes through the zodiac and dies and resurrects at the winter solstice. He's a magic mushroom, and he's also the Flavian Caesar Titus. So we see a story being unveiled.
Such as Joe Atwill has put forward.
Exactly. Joseph Atwill's theory, your co-author with your latest work.
Manufacturing
the Deadhead.
A product of social engineering. Go ahead.
Right. So basically what I've done is I've taken astrotheology and shamanism and Caesar's Messiah and said Nostradamus is talking about all these things, and that the idea that he's the sun, he's a magic mushroom, and he's a Flavian Caesar Titus are not mutually exclusive. It's like, well, he can't be the sun and a mushroom at the same time. Well, it's like, no.
Well, I was just saying, and we showed in astrotheology and shamanism how they very much could be, with the as above, so below themes, and this and that. You have the sun in the sky above, and then it's representation, so-called, on Earth, and then people would eat it and they would think that they were enlightened or what have you. So here we have two of these versions, and then a third one is that he is a human being or God incarnate, and then you can have many different ones that we talked about, and these different layers of allegory.
Yeah, well, the easiest way for me to understand Titus being the sun god is just to look at it as an Egyptian idea. So within the Egyptian culture, the pharaoh is the earthly incarnation of the sun god Horus. So in life, he's Horus, the sun god, and the Egyptian pharaohs have 7 or 8 different names. One of them is a secret name that if Isis learns it, she can play shenanigans on somebody. But one of them is their Horus name. So here's the pharaoh. He's the divine right of kings. He's the earthly incarnation of the sun god Horus. In death, he's going to be the incarnation of Osiris, and we'll talk about that. But the idea that a pharaoh, a king, or an emperor is the sun god is just the Roman Flavian Caesar Titus saying, I'm going to have a sun god name. It's not going to be Horus. It's going to be Jesus.
Right. And so, just like it's so common throughout ancient Egypt and Rome, etc., that the emperors and kings would adorn themselves names after the sun.
Right.
And so people, 2,000 years ago, it wasn't such an odd concept.
Right. And then when we look at the idea that an Amanita muscaria mushroom with a red top that's round looks like the sun, and you look at that as being the sun come to earth in the flesh, or God come to earth in the flesh in the form of this mushroom. It's the earthly representation of the sun.
And it's born under the evergreen tree that survives the cold, dark winters of the chthonic realm.
Mm-hmm.
So then it's like, then it's reborn on Christmas morning.
Right, and if you look at the symbiotic relationship of the magic mushroom and the tree, so where the tree feeds the mushroom, but then the mushroom feeds the tree, start putting that concept into the tree of life. So where you sit there and go, where is the tree of life? Okay, so we'll look at some of the images in the Lost Book that represent the tree of life, and we'll look at the idea that the magic mushroom is tied in with the tree of life. So we look at, like, if Jesus is the mushroom and he's saying in the Bible some bizarre stuff that says, if you do not have me and I am not in you, or you sit there and you get confused and going, wait a minute, like, you're telling me you're the bread of life, and
sure,
if I'm not in you and you're not in me.
So essentially what we're looking at is 2 levels of allegory. It's like Gordon Wasson using he's out there promoting the religiosity of mushrooms in the book, while at the same time he's working with the CIA and MKUltra Subproject 58. So we have all of these stories that the mushrooms are this spiritual experience. Okay, but what if there's a whole other level to this? And this is what we've been looking at, is how did the Pope, the Supreme Pontiff, etc., how did they maintain power over the others? And is it possible that they would give the drug experience to the lower initiates, who were then later told, as it went through, that it really wasn't about the drug experience, that was just how they controlled the lower levels? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think I follow that.
Okay.
if we want to talk about drugs and mushrooms in the context of Noah and this flood, so we know from studying your material that when you eat the magic mushroom, it turns your urine into the psychoactive drug, therefore turning your urine into wine.
And you could even hide that from somebody that you've consumed the mushroom, and then therefore, your urine has special properties and nobody else does, right?
Yeah. The context that, this isn't anything that you can look up and get a footnote on, but I always just look for every possible allegory in these stories. And when I look at Noah being the first winemaker, and that after he drinks wine, his sons see him naked, well, I look at the idea of nakedness as being one of the ideas that when you eat a Amanita muscaria mushroom, that you have telepathy. So to me, when I look at that idea of him being a winemaker or being drunk on wine, and then his shields are down to where he's naked, I look at that as, are they looking at that saying telepathy? Where they see him with his shields down.
Here's my issue with that is, having gone through all of that and studied that, you have a really serious problem on that point with, telepathy, say, for instance, with, lack of evidence or the onus of proof.
Sure.
Whereas, we have to be careful of arguing a magical answer. What could be something more realistic there that's pointing to it directly? And the trick is when we think of the drugs as tools of mind control rather than spiritual tools, and they may have spiritual value, and that's irrelevant, but to the predator, when the person is under the so-called experience, the predator can do with that person what they want, because that person is going to be impressionable. You're going to be able to give them subjective ideas, etc. And they're probably not going to be able to think about it in other terms. And on another level, the drunkenness, and then he's naked, also goes back to like Bacchus and the drunks and things like that too. So anyway, that's just my feeling of that.
Like I said, I qualified that. Like, there's no footnote. I just kind of ponder the idea when I read like Clark Heinrich saying that him and his friend that he tripped on mushrooms are having telepathy.
Well, and I wonder if it is telepathy or if we're actually just in a super heightened state where we notice people's facial expressions and hand motions and things like that on a much more heightened level, such as like NLP would reveal, and we're just more heightened to it rather than picking up on some energy, because then we have to have all of these unsupported premises.
Right. It's like, I'm just looking at every possible angle to solve mysteries, basically. So going back to where we're at this flood story, we'll take a look at a quatrain from Nostradamus. So earlier we said that we find the ship Gemini by looking at 30 by 50. So if I go to quatrain number 30, the first thing that I read, the first line on quatrain 1-30 reads as follows: because of the storm at sea, the foreign ship. So that would be the first line of that quatrain, and I'm sitting here going, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to see if it's number coded, and the first thing it tells me is that there's a ship in the foreign sea. Now, Nostradamus has a lot of number coding and a lot of numerology. So another way for us to look for a quatrain that fits the number 30 is to go to chapter number 2 to quatrain number 15. So 2 times 15 is 30. And the second line of that quatrain says Castor and Pollux in the ship, bearded star. So we have Castor and Pollux in the ship, and the bearded star is going to be Cancer with the beehive. So if you want to sit there and ask yourself, how in the hell did Noah feed all those animals? Well, you just look where the ship is. It's in the Milky Way, and it's next to the beehive, so it's in the land of milk and honey. If you want a little...
Gotcha. Right, milk and honey.
So, okay, so everything fits there. Now, like I said, the key to understanding the number code in the Bible, where the specifications for Noah's Ark is 30 by 50 by 300, is that we're talking about 300 being the astrological age of Aquarius, where that 300 is the 300 degrees of celestial longitude when the sun's at the vernal equinox, the sun's in Aquarius. So let's see how we might bring in the age, and we'll look at the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. So we kind of went a little bit out of order, but we can put this together to say the flood is going to happen when we're in the age of Aquarius, because who else but the man with the water pitcher to cause the flood. So the first horseman we're going to look for is going to be the white horse. So the white horse is Sagittarius. Now, the way you figure out who the horseman is, I saw it on a video by Karen Anderson on YouTube, and it's the astrological revelation, something to that effect.
Many researchers have found things in the stars, confirming the handiwork of the Creator. Researchers such as E.W. Bullinger had pioneered studies which have been a springboard for me. Bullinger noted a similarity between Sagittarius and one of the 4 horsemen. What if they're all there, I thought. Around this same theme, I thought of the verse describing the heavens being rolled up as a scroll. I had a planisphere or star map in my hands, and I rolled it up like a scroll. When I opened it up, I found something remarkable. The quest had begun. 3 days later, I was satisfied to have located all 4 horsemen in the stars, and with growing anticipation, begin to understand that all the symbols described in the book of Revelation were in the stars.
And in that, she describes the 4 horsemen, but she doesn't tell you why they're the 4 horsemen. Okay, so I'm going to tell you why they're the 4 horsemen. And what we're going to do is look at the 4 living characters in the book of Revelation, where here we're going to have Scorpio. We're going to have Scorpio is the eagle. The man is Aquarius. The bull or the ox is Taurus. And the lion, of course, is Leo. Now,
and these are Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John as well.
Sure. Okay, but astrologically the significance is, and I've highlighted both the lines of the solstices and the equinoxes. And what we see in this diagram is that Scorpio is moving from right to left. So when it intersects this line, it would be on the solstice line. And as you can see, Scorpio is just about there, but it's going to need some help. And that's where the horseman comes in to bring in the age or bring in the apocalypse. The other side of Scorpio is Sagittarius. So when Scorpio gets on the horseman, Sagittarius, that's going to bring them together, and that's going to bring Scorpio over that line. So the importance is, when we look over here at Aquarius, Aquarius is next to the line where the sun's going to be in the vernal equinox, and it's going to need some help in order to see who he's going to ride in. So let's first talk about Sagittarius as the white horse, and we see Corona Australis, so that's the white horse that's going to have a crown, and he's going to have a bow, which is his archer's bow, and he's going to go out to conquer and to conquering. The next horseman we're going to talk about is on this page, and it's going to be the no, actually it's on this page. It's the black horseman that we're now going to be looking at, as Centaurus is that horseman, and over here Leo, the lion, he's almost on that fall equinox
line. Is Leo a horse, or?
He's not the horse, Centaurus is the horse.
Okay.
So the reason he's on the opposite sign of this fall equinox line, so he's going to bring in Leo, where if you read the Bible, I think somewhere in Revelation it says the sickle is the harvest. Well, it's telling you that he's moving into this period. So the way that Centaurus is the black horseman, he's holding the scales of Libra in his hand, and he's talking about the wheat. So Virgo is the house of bread, or Bethlehem. He's talking about the wheat and the barley, and then he talks about don't harm the oil or the wine. So that's virgin oil, the Virgo the virgin. So when Leo joins onto Sagittarius, it brings it into this line to the fall equinox. So each one of the 4 characters to bring in the apocalypse has to touch this line, and that's going to bring in the age of Aquarius, as we'll show on this diagram after we talk about the red horse. So the red horse is Taurus. Now it's a bull, but it's going to function as a horse for the rider of Orion. So Orion's on the line, so when he matches, he's going to bring Taurus onto the line of the summer solstice. So, and he's the warrior. So Orion is known as the warrior. And he has a sword. If you see, he has a sword in his middle section. So now we come to the age of Aquarius, where this is the spring equinox line. And when we see Aquarius right here, it's just off the line, but it's going to be riding the horse Pegasus. So when he's the horse, and Pegasus is the pale horse that's going to bring in death, and the death he's going to bring in is the flood we just saw. So he's bringing in the apocalypse. So this brings in the age of Aquarius, which of course takes us out of the age of Pisces, which is the age of Jesus. So we can see that we have this idea of nobody knows when the astrological age of Aquarius starts. Some people say it was hundreds of years ago. Some people say it's hundreds of years in the future. Well, we're looking at this as an idea that 2012 is the age of Aquarius, the beginning of it.
This is the dawning of the age of Aquarius, age of Aquarius.
Okay, so now that we're bringing in the apocalypse, we'll go back and look at one of the quatrains from Nostradamus where we can see that this is the right time period. So there's two ideas we need to have to think of, well, why would 2012 be the time period that we're bringing in the apocalypse, or the unveiling of the biblical story as an astrological allegory? So if we look at the idea of an astrological age being 2,000 years and the great year 24,000 years, the idea that's promoted by Walter Cruttendon in The Lost Star of Myth and Time, or the documentary The Great Year, they explain how our sun is in a binary and we have this changing rate of precession, but on average the whole great year is 24,000 years, and each astrological age of the 12 signs of the zodiac is divided accordingly and arbitrarily 2,000 years. So the idea that I understand from that would be, well, wait a minute, the sun's in Scorpio for 8 days, but yet it's in Taurus for 38 days. If you were to calculate the real amount of time each astrological age has, you would, one, have to know where our binary star is. So the idea is we have this changing rate of precession based upon our binary star being closer or being farther away. So if you don't know where that star is at, and you don't know what rate of precession you're in changing, how can you calculate whether you're going to be more days if precession is slowing down, say, if you're in Scorpio? How do I know if I'm going to be more than 8 days because it's slowing down, or how do I know it's going to be less because it's speeding up? They just looked at it and said, we can't figure that out, but we can figure out that every 24,000 years we start at the same spot. We'll just roll with that, divide it, and say each one's 2,000 years arbitrarily. So when we look at the planisphere and we see, well, those signs aren't in, we're not in the age of Aquarius. We're not on the vernal equinox. Well, it's the concept of saying we don't have to be. We're saying we're not in the age of Aquarius. We're not on that line. So the concept we're putting forth is, that's why we have the 4 horsemen to bring it in. We're recognizing it's 2,000 years arbitrarily divided amongst the 12 signs. So even if it wasn't close here, it could be way over here. You'd say, well, if that's just the arbitrarily time it's going to be the new age, then we'll do it. So if we were going into the age of Scorpio, for example, it's only 8 days. You wouldn't expect it to be even that close to the line. And if it was, it would be just, sheer luck. But because they're dividing it arbitrarily and not saying, okay, Scorpio is going to be an astrological age that relates to those 8 days, we're just going to say, we don't know if it's faster or slower. We don't know where we're at. We're just going to divide it up and leave it at that. So the first time period we're going to look at is just 2,000 years. The reason the 2,000 years is significant is it's 2,000 years that we started our new calendar where we're 2012, and it's 2,000 years ago we have the birth of our Lord and Savior, at least if you want to put it in a historical context. So the reason it's 2,000 years to 2012, then we look at Nostradamus, who lived in the 1500s, and the next quatrain I'm going to read to you, he's telling you 500 years more. So we're going to look at quatrain, I believe it's 3-94, and I'll read that to you. It says, "For 500 years more they will take notice of him who was the ornament of his age. Then suddenly a great revelation will be made, which will make people of the same century
People of that same century well pleased."
Okay, so the key there is to look at that 500 years, and Nostradamus says in the instructions to his son. So in the beginning of the book, The Prophecies, he has a letter to his son Caesar, and he basically says this effect: the prophecies, which is the book he wrote, the quatrains in, are based upon astrological occurrences, and these events haven't happened yet. So you would sit there and say, I'm going to think this through really detailed. And he's saying, what I wrote is based upon astrology, and that astrology hasn't happened yet. It's in the future.
Yeah, something I was thinking about with, these ideas that Nostradamus and these guys are prophets. It's like the post hoc fallacy, or putting the cart before the horse, so to speak. Because, what if you were, let's say, for instance, a military strategist, and he's working, and you have an idea that you want to plan something through multiple centuries rather than just at one specific time. I mean, you could literally plan things out via the stars when you want them to take place, and then therefore you're not predicting anything, you're actually engineering what takes place at that time.
Right. Well, the way I'm looking at this is I'm trying to figure out what time period am I supposed to look for the astronomy.
And you were saying that a lot of the times you had to look, it wasn't to the future actually where you found the answer, but to the past.
Well, there's another thing that Nostradamus is talking about, and there's other stuff that we can see in the Lost Book of Nostradamus, and one of the things he's talking about is the Jewish War.
Okay.
So that's when we bring in Caesar's Messiah and the Flavians and whatnot. So there's pictures in the Lost Book of Nostradamus where it's picture number 27 and number 29, and one of those pictures shows a bunch of people on top of like a fort or a temple. Looks like they're at war or something like that. And we see another picture of a very similar temple, but yet we just see a bunch of waving hands. Well, if you're trying to figure out what temple that is that the original guys are, the warrior guys, and then you see this other picture with a bunch of waving palms. Where did they wave palms when Jesus came into Jerusalem?
Right.
So it's a way for me to understand. He's pointing you to the Jewish war here. Okay? And then there's another quatrain, and I don't have that one right off the top of my head. I didn't plan that one to talk about. But it basically, any Nostradamus, scholar will say, know this quatrain, or you could dig it up really easy. And it's the one where he says, at 45 degrees, the sky will burn. So people go, oh wow, New York is at like 41 degrees, and the Twin Towers, and well, what he's talking about there is if you take a map out and you go 45 longitude, 45 latitude, and then you go 45 degrees southwest of that, you'll be right in Jerusalem. So it's a number-coded way where he's telling you to go to Jerusalem and think about the sky burning, and that's what happens when they burn the temple. So he's alluding in the past, the reference you're making, that he's talking about the past, is the way I understand it, he's trying to tell you who did this. So if we want to focus on who did this, we go to quatrain number chapter 1 or century 1, verse 69. So the reason I'm going to 69 specifically is the Flavian Caesars are the emperors of Rome from 69 to 96. Now, if we talk about the three Antichrists, one of the quatrains that talks about the three Antichrists says for 27 years the Antichrist will rule. So his 27 years is 96 minus 69. So he's talking about for 27 years, this dynasty is the Antichrist. The three Antichrists are the Flavians, Caesars, Titus, Vespasian, and Domitian. It's not Hitler, it's not Napoleon, and it's not a character named Maebus. For sure it's not Maebus. So the first one we're going to look at is century 1-69, starting with the year the Flavians start their empire. And the first sentence is the great mountain 7 stadia round. So that's an allusion to the Colosseum. Now, when we go to quatrain number 96, it gets a little bit more specific, and you can think in terms of Titus. So 96, quatrain 1-96 says, a man will be charged with the destruction of temples and sects, altered by his fantasy. He will harm the rocks rather than the living, ears filled with ornate speeches. Well, we clearly see the first couple sentences, a man will be charged with the destruction of temples. That's Titus.
Right.
It's date coded, here to quatrain 196, and then when it says destruction of temples and sects, well, the sect is the Jewish religion, because the Flavians hijacked that religion, turned it into Christianity.
Right.
And it's just an astrological allegory, and some of the details that I'm able to tell you based upon the Lost Book pictures of Nostradamus. I mean, there's some, I almost don't even want to say some of the things that are in there, say like who the two thieves are. I don't even know if I want to say who that is, and you can see Lost Book numbers, I think it's picture number 26, or is it 23, that has the 3 pillars, and in that you can figure out who the two thieves are. I don't even know if I want to say it.
Who are they?
They're David and Solomon.
Okay.
And the way you figure that out is the cross that's in the sky in the constellation of Orion. You look at both sides of the planisphere. So the cross is going to be right here in the constellation of Orion. Okay? And you look at both sides, so we're looking at the south side, and to the right, here we have what's called the winter hexagon. Okay? And then we turn it over, and then here's the cross again, and to the right, or I said it wrong the last time, it's to the left, but they're opposite sides. I'll do it again. Here it is to the right, the winter hexagon is right of the cross, and then over here, the winter hexagon is going to be left of the cross. Okay, now another thing, the Skull Hill part of this is Canis Major, Betelgeuse, and Procyon. They're going to make what's called the winter triangle. So we see the cross right here in Orion. The 3 belt stars are the middle of the cross. Betelgeuse is the top of the cross. Star Rigel is the bottom of the cross. And it's connected directly to the winter triangle. And what's going to happen is that's going to go below the horizon. You're going to have the allegory of Died across at Skull Hill. And then what pops up over here on the east, when it goes down in the west, is a coffin, or the constellation of Ophiuchus. And that's at December. We see there's December 21st, when the sun is dead for 3 days and resurrects. So another way to look at this, it would be the Egyptian way. So if we look at it as an Egyptian allegory, the first thing we'll point out is the constellation of Orion is the Egyptian god Osiris. Now, if we look at this picture of this triangle, and we sit there and ask ourselves, there's a triangle connected to Osiris. Why might that be important? Because the theory, that which is above is also a below. So I took a class on ancient Egypt, and I asked my professor, why is it that the Egyptians build pyramids in the shape of a triangle versus, say, a rectangle or a square or some other geometric shape? He didn't know. He didn't have an answer. When I turned in my paper, I showed him a picture of what's called the winter hexagon, and within there you have the winter triangle, and it shows that that triangle is connected to Osiris, or the constellation of Orion. So in the stars, connecting to Osiris, or Orion, is a triangle. Now the dead pharaoh that's buried in the pyramid It just so happens that he wants to ascend to the constellation of Orion in his afterlife. So should it be a surprise that that which is above connecting to Osiris, a triangle, should also be the mechanism that the dead pharaoh is using as a tomb so that he can ascend?
No, I think
that?
the three pyramids also line up with the three stars of the belt of Orion, and then they're next to the Nile, and then this is next to the Milky Way.
Exactly. So that gives support to Robert Bauval's theory, who comes out with the Orion theory, where the three belt stars represent the as above portion of the as below, the Giza, the pyramids laid out at the Giza plateau. What you would say is those three kings weren't just randomly saying, I want to go to Orion. I think they were a little bit more specific and said, no, we want to go right there to the belt. We want to be right there. Would be one way to interpret it. So that's just an idea of trying to show you how as above below works. Connected to Osiris and the stars is a triangle. The pharaoh wants to connect to Osiris down below. He uses a pyramid or a triangle. Now, the other thing I want to point out is early on in my research, I came across the documentary The Hidden Story of Jesus, that has Robert Beckford interviewing the Egyptologist Bojana Moitsov. And she explains in that documentary that for thousands of years, the Egyptians would have a celebration where they would bury a statue of Osiris, and then 3 days later they would bring that statue out and celebrate the resurrection of Osiris. So if you put that story together, you're telling me for 1,000 years prior to Christianity, or even 2,000 years,
that they would have buried him on the 21st and brought him up on the 24th, right?
She doesn't necessarily state exactly what the date is. I can show you astrologically how we can verify that, though, because we're going to sit here and say, here's Osiris, and if we look at the myth of Osiris, we're going to be able to tie that together. So the myth of Osiris is that his brother Seth builds a coffin based upon the measurements of Osiris. He gets the measurement of Osiris's shadow, builds a coffin, and at this party he says whoever fits into it gets to keep it. Okay, so I want to connect the idea that Osiris is buried, and then 3 days they bring out his statue, with that myth, that we see that myth in the planisphere. Here's Osiris. He's going to be placed in where? A coffin. And when is it? It's December 21st, just like what you said, when the sun is dead for 3 days and then resurrects. So we can see the connection, but we say Jesus is right here, and in this cross, died on a cross at Skull Hill, placed in a tomb, dead for 3 days. It's the same story, and it's the same astronomy. So if some zeitgeist debunker wants to say, there's no pagan parallels, I'll say, well, first of all, you're completely in fallacy because you're not recognizing the evidence. We have an Egyptologist saying they buried him, and I'm sitting here saying nobody's going to argue that Osiris is not Orion. So,
well, you know, in Chris White's video debunking Zeitgeist, he took one of our images, or debunking Astrotheology, he took one of our images, which was a split screen, and then misrepresented it. You know, we showed Christmas Eve at 6 p.m., and then Christmas morning around 6 a.m., and then he put these two together and showed Stellarium and said, see, look, there is no this image, when we were very clear in the book and the video that it was a split screen.
Right, I'm very familiar with that image, and he shows the sun 2,000 years ago being born at the winter solstice, and if you look close of his image, you'll see the sun's born nearly in Ophiuchus.
Right.
It's almost like you're sitting there going, you know, dude, you're practically giving all the answers away, or or even in that he's teasing me or prompting me to look for the evidence. So we'll get to the birth narrative, and in his thing he says, well, what about the three kings visiting King Herod? There's no room for that action in this story or in this allegory, and I'm going to show you that whole birth narrative of Matthew in detail, and then Chris White's going to go home and cry to his mama, because I'm going to be sitting there saying, not only is there room for that in this story, but when you see it, it's ass-kicking material. So back where we're at, if I want to say anything else about the Osiris Jesus connection, now another thing I want to point out is we put this right here. I'm going to tell you that Ophiuchus is the house of God, and we're going to say that, you know, this is where you go for eternal life. So a way that I can demonstrate that is if you notice the serpent's caput and the serpent's cadua, on this side of the planisphere, they're underneath Ophiuchus. When I flip it over, they're going to be on top. Now, if you were to connect that together, you'd have a perfect circle of snakes, which is the Ouroboros, eternal life. So, you know, somebody wants to sit there and says, you know, there's no way in the hell that all this astrotheology makes any sense, and, you know, how's that the house of God? Because that's where you go for eternal life. So that's one of the other things I'd point out. Once again, we can see it's underneath there. So now we did the crucifixion. The next image we'll look at in the Lost Book of Nostradamus, if you want to print it out, would be image number 41. So one of the things I want to point out why he's pulling this image up is that we looked at the flood story and we see that that's on December 21st, 2012. Now, we looked at the crucifixion and we saw that also is December 21st, 2012. Now, why that's significant is in the book of Matthew, it says the second coming of Jesus will be just like the days of Noah. Well, we see that the flood story, December 21st, 2012, is the same as the crucifixion, or the astrological second coming of Jesus. So we make these connections, and the reason I want to look at that image right there is because we have also the idea that there'll be wars and rumors of wars. So image number 41 is going to be the allegory of David and Goliath. And the way that that works is that we have one character that's a giant, and he's got these three little red balls or something on the picture, 3 dots at his belt line. So Orion is known as the giant, he's known as the warrior, and that character also has a big battle axe next to him. The two characters on the right, at the lower right, the dog and the horse, well, the dog is going to be like the dog star, Sirius, next to Orion, and the horse is Monoceros, which is also, we can look here, when we get back to Orion, there's Monoceros and there's Canis Major, Sirius. So we have Orion, the giant, next to those characters. When we will look at the little character on the left, that's going to be Ophiuchus, that's going to be David. So we just put Jesus in Ophiuchus, that's the tomb. So that's whose tomb? Joseph of Arimathea. Well, it's also going to be his father's house when we look at the birth narrative. So Joseph is Joseph, just the same typology. And Jesus has to come from the same house as David. So David's house is Joseph's house. They're all going to be in Ophiuchus. And that's going to play a lot of, when we look at the saints rising from their grave when Jesus resurrects, we'll look at those pictures and look at the idea of the zombies walking the streets of Jerusalem. I'll explain that they're just all coming from the same tomb. They're all resurrecting at the same time. So in regards to this picture, above the smaller character, we have Libra, the scales, represented by the fleur-de-lis, a balance symbol, and then we have Virgo, the Virgin, and in the picture, she's suckling the baby Jesus. So the way that allegory works, and it's a real doozy because the final touches of this one is that in the year 2012, the planet Venus is going to go retrograde right through the constellation of Orion. Now, where I see that is I've watched every documentary that has anything to do with Nostradamus that I could get my hands on, and one of those documentaries is the History Channel Doomsday Hieroglyphs. So in that, they're showing how the planet Venus goes retrograde right through the constellation of Orion. And it happens during the year of 2012. And the reason that's important because that's the stone that hits the giant in the head. And then the rest of the allegory is when the giant goes below the horizon, it gets its head cut off, and then David is going to rise to power. So the astrological allegory is still just the same astronomy as died on a cross, placed in a tomb. It's just reversing the story. It's saying the giant is going to die and he's going to have his head cut off, and then David rises into power in Ophiuchus. And the interesting thing about that picture, it's picture number 41, so you could say that the giant Goliath taunted the Hebrew brothers of David for 40 days, but by the 41st day, that giant's ass was grass. So next we're going to look at one more kind of mysteries to demonstrate how I look at the Bible as mysteries would be to look at the discrepancy. So a biblical scholar like Bart Ehrman will look at the birth narratives and he'll say there's a discrepancy. Matthew's birth narrative is saying he's born at the time of King Herod. King Herod, who most accounts you see will die in 4 BC. But Luke says he was born during the time when Quirinius was governor of Syria and the census was taking place. Well, the census is in the year 6 and it lasts for 2 years, so it's the year 6 and 7. So we're pretty locked down tight with Luke's birth narrative of being the year 6 or 7. We get a little bit more wiggle room when we talk about Matthew's birth narrative because it's just before 4 BC. Now if we look at the timing of that, it's a 10-year difference. There's no year 0, 4 BC, and then 6 AD. 4 and 6 is 10. To put that in a modern day context, instead of saying Herod and Quirinius, for me to digest that in a modern day context, I say I say Matthew is saying he was born when Bill Clinton was president, and Luke is saying, no, it was when Barack Obama was president. So you would say they're both divided by the whole Bush presidency of 8 years. So how do these stories coincide? And I like listening to David Fitzgerald. He has a video on YouTube where he's doing a presentation at Skepticon, and he talks about this little discrepancy, and he says, well, many people have tried to solve this little riddle, but none of them have sufficed because they're looking at it historically. If you look at it as purely an astrological allegory, you sit there and you say, okay, he's going to be born just like the sun, and then he's going to be born again. So part of the way to solve this little riddle is there's a web page on aloha.net, and it shows that the Star of David is made by an alignment of the planets. And this happens on March 5th, 5 BC. So if I look at that Star of David as being a sign of the coming Messiah, and I look at March 2nd, 5 BC as being either the birth of Jesus or the incarnate, the pregnation of the Virgo, the Virgin, whatever, if I use 5 BC in this context that we're talking about, trying to solve this mystery, we say, okay, if he's born in 5 BC, that meets Matthew's criteria that it's within the time period of King Herod. And if we're looking at that Star of David made by the planets, where an astrologer will see that is on the astrologer's chart. So it's not like you're going to look at the planets and see it. An astrologer's chart, they're going to plot this out. So the Magi mentioned in Matthew's birth narrative, they fit the qualification of somebody that's going to be able to see a Star of David made on an astrologer's chart.
Right, because the Magi were the astrologers.
Exactly. So we use 5 BC as the birth of Jesus. We use 7 AD for Luke's account. Now we have no year 0, and we have 5 BC plus 7 AD. 5 plus 7 is 12. It's just simply saying this. The sun is born at the winter solstice, goes around the 12 signs of the zodiac, or the 12 ages, and it's born again. He's born in 5 BC, goes around the 12 ages of the zodiac. 12 years later, he's born again. So we have born and born again. Now there's different parts.
12 years later or 12 months later?
Well, it's 12 ages. I count it as the 12 ages of the zodiac. So I look at that and I say, how can I make this work? So basically what we're saying is like this. We almost explain how he goes, well, we'll do the detail of how he skips from being an infant to being 12, and it's by going through the 12 ages again. So that's how I would reconcile those two birth narratives. I'd say, well, we're just saying one saying he's born, goes around the 12 signs of the zodiac, and he's born again. So the concept is, I look at this and say, I'm going to, not to say that it was written or Christianity is invented to be a mystery school religion based on sun worship or astrology, but I'm kind of thinking, how do I explain what I'm doing? And I say, I'm looking at it from an angle to where I'm going to say, all the religions before, during, and after Christianity, so we go, our mystery school religions based on sun worship and astrology. We look at the mysteries of Osiris and the mysteries of Isis, and we would say their culture, sun worship. Then we say Isis is the star Sirius, Osiris is Orion, so we have the mysteries of Osiris, which is in the context of sun worship, and the characters are constellations. We go forward in time to the Greeks with their sun god Helios or Apollos, and then we can look on a planisphere and see all kinds of Greek characters all over the place, where we would have Perseus, Pegasus, Cassiopeia, Hercules. So we'd have Pegasus here, we have Andromeda here, let's see, where do we have Hercules? So we can see all these mystery school religions in Greece. So we have the mysteries of Demeter, the Eleusinian mysteries. And then we go forward in time, we have the mysteries of Mithra right there at the 1st century to the 300s with Constantine. And Mithra is encircled in the zodiac. We have the mysteries of Mithra. So I just say, okay, I'm going to look at this as it's a mystery school religion based on sun worship and astrology, and the things we don't know. When was he born? Well, that's a mystery. We don't know, it doesn't say he's born December 25th. But now that we're on the idea that he's born December 25th, we can look at the full-blown birth narrative of Matthew, and we'll start by causing some grief to some zeitgeist debunkers. Okay, so the first thing I wanted to do when I looked at this planisphere, and this is the first thing I was able to verify. So I watched the Zeitgeist movie, and then I could see in the sidebar that there was debunking of the Zeitgeist movie. And what I noticed was some of the debunkers are saying, well, that astronomy doesn't happen anything at all like what they describe. And I didn't know until I walked into the college bookstore and bought myself a planisphere, and then my jaw dropped because I'm sitting there going, if I look and see where here's Sirius and there's the 3 belt stars, and I sit here and I go, well, there it is, 8 p.m. on December 24th, and that fits what Zeitgeist is telling me. It says, December 24th, Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky. For some reason,
right up on the horizon right there, and they took, we had put that out in the Pharmacratic Inquisition before Zeitgeist had even come out.
Exactly, and you might grab a copy of your book because I'm going to point something out on page 26. So basically, I got obsessed with this little bit of astronomy right here because I'm sitting there going, wait a minute, here it is, I didn't know, and when I figure it out, sure enough, they're there. Now, I want to keep in mind that this is the astronomy of December 21st, 2012. We saw the flood story as the December 21st, 2012. We see that the crucifixion is December 21st, 2012. We're looking at the 4 horsemen, and they look like they're bringing in the apocalypse at December 21st, 2012.
And at each equinoctial and solstice line, ironically.
Yeah, every one of those 4 characters has a horseman bringing him into that representative line. So one of the things I noticed was in your documentary it says that this is the longest that these stars are out at night. And I looked and I said, okay, what's the earliest that these 3 belt stars rise? Well, it's almost exactly December 20th or 21st, so we'll use the 20th because that's the night before the solstice. That's the earliest they rise, okay? And then I brought it way over here and I said, look when they fall. Once again, in the morning, it's about December 21st when they go below the horizon. I'm saying, wait a second, I can verify that that's the
On a
longest
piece
they're
of
exposed."
cardboard.
On a piece, and there's PhD scholars saying that astronomy happens nothing like that. Well, okay, if you want to say that, fine, but you can't verify what they're saying. So the first thing that really got me excited about this research was I could say, for all practical purposes, the people are saying that zeitgeist has been debunked or lying through their freaking teeth.
And we had people that had never been to the library, read any of the work, and they had gone on our forum and just attacking us because Peter Joseph had taken some of the stuff from Zeitgeist 1 with, he had just taken like some of the images and stuff right out of our video. And so we started getting a bunch of attacks from people who just were, all sorts of fallacious attacks. And one day I went to the Cal State Northridge Library, or not one day, I spent like 3 or 4 days there just going through each and every citation just related to these specific, topics. And, for instance, Jesus versus Horus versus Mithra, etc. And just 3 or 4 days just going through and verifying each of these claims. And, there would be 20 or 30 scholars giving dozens of references, and one scholar sitting there going, no, it can't be that. But when we would go through, it's like, sure, there certainly were all of these things. Like, Mithra's brother Yima was the good shepherd. And this is something, Mithra wasn't the good shepherd. Well, if you look up at the stories, actually, his twin brother Yima was the good shepherd. So, in fact, that story did check out there. But you wanted to reference something here.
Yeah, I'm gonna just hold that page till we get to that part of the story. Sure. Okay, so at this point now, I'm gonna do the whole birth narrative of Matthew and show you how it works as an astrological allegory. So we start out here. It's about 8 p.m. on December 20th, and we have Sirius followed by the 3 Magi. Okay, so far it checks out. Now, what I noticed when I was thinking about, okay, when should I find these stars according to Zeitgeist? I'm looking at the passage. It says Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky. Okay, so it's going to be night, and he says it's December 24th. Okay, so I know that the earliest those 3 belt stars now rise is 6 p.m., and then at 8 p.m., Sirius is going to pop up, and it's going to point to the east horizon where the sun's going to rise. So that far, it checks out. But I thought to myself, how long do I have on December 24th? Well, I have till midnight. So we're going to dial it in till midnight and see, there it is, December 20th at midnight. And then now, I'm looking at the belt stars, and if I were to draw a line in between here, they're pointing over to the constellation Leo. So the 3 Magi follow the star of the east, and they point to where we find Leo the king, or King Herod. So
Leo is also ironically representative of the sun, Leo the lion, with the big lion's mane.
Sure. So I wanted to make the comment, if you see in a Zeitgeist debunking video where there's no room for the visit to the king in this story, well, just dial your planisphere into midnight and you'll see that they visit the king. And from the movie Zeitgeist, we're told that Bethlehem is the house of bread, which translates to the constellation Virgo. And oddly enough, after the 3 Magi visit the king, the next astrological house to pop up is Virgo. So King Herod sends them to Virgo. Now, the interesting thing is, here's the 3 Magi, and according to the story, they're going to bow down into Mary's house. Well, she's over here, and as we turn the dial, she's going to get farther away. The trick is, just like this was the cross placed in the tomb, it's going to go to the same place. So what goes below the horizon in the west is going to pop up in the east. So we're going to watch the Magi bow down to the earth, into, aw shucks, that's Joseph's house. But wait a second, Mary is going to move into Joseph's house.
Right.
So in this case, it's as below, so above. So now Mary moves into Joseph's house, the house of God, encircled by the serpents, the Ouroboros. So this is the house of David. And where does David come from? Bethlehem. That's why Jesus has to be born in Bethlehem to fulfill prophecy or whatnot. Now, the other trick here is that Jesus is going to hide down in Egypt. And that's when I need to look at Jan's book. Okay? So what we're going to do is say now the sun is born at the winter solstice. And that's going to be right here in Capricorn, between Capricorn and Sagittarius. And when it's born in Sagittarius, so if you look up the horoscope of the sun to see what day, what sign the sun is, it's going to be Sagittarius. It's December 21st. So we have Sagittarius, the archer or the hunter, and we have to look at the sign opposite. So when Sagittarius rises above the horizon, the sign opposite is going to fall below. So we just saw died on a cross, placed in a tomb. Ophiuchus and Orion are opposite. When one's up, one's down. So David and Goliath, when the giant Orion goes below, David pops up. So one sign takes out the other. So we have Sagittarius, the hunter, in opposition to Gemini, the age of the two children, and the allegory for hunting for the children under the age of 2. Now at the same exact time, we have in Jan's book, the 3 magi sitting on top of the star Sirius. Now the reason it's important that we understand that the 3 magi are sitting on top of Sirius is Sirius represents the Egyptian god Isis. And if you're looking at an Egyptian hieroglyph and you see a female character and you want to identify if she's Isis or not, Isis is the female character with the throne as a headdress. Isis is the throne.
Sure. Now, this is actually the image that Chris White had misrepresented. This was actually a split screen, and he showed it. He tried to show it as, we'll see, you can't see all of this as once, and it's a split screen, Christmas Eve, Christmas morning.
Right. Just like we pay attention to what it says in Zeitgeist, December 24th, so he's using the 24th is the night before the solstice. That's the Julian calendar. But we're using the 20th, and it's interchangeable to me. It's like being bilingual in a calendar way. It's like, is it Gregorian or Julian? Right. So the important thing to point out is we have the star Sirius is the throne. And sitting on the throne is the 3 kings. Okay? Now,
a new king is born.
Right. And on page 25, Jan writes that at the top here that according to my tables, to this time of the year, 2004, at the 67th degree latitude, that the sun is not visible for the 3 days from the 21st to the 25th. But at noon, it is still bright outside. So I look at that as like, I don't get up early in the morning. I think of the sunset. I say, okay, when the sun sets, it's gone, but there's still a little glow. Now we go back to this picture, and here we see the sun. Just think of it not being above the horizon, but think of it as hiding in the valley. So if we look at the sun hiding in the valley, that's pointed at by the 3 kings, the sun's hiding in the valley of the kings, or Egypt. So that's that part of the allegory. We saw that the hunting for the children is Sagittarius in opposition to Gemini. Now there's one more thing, and then we'll start the whole zodiac. We'll go from the beginning to the end. And the other thing is that here's Leo, and he is going to go below the horizon. So think of the sun or Jesus hiding in the valley of the kings, and Jesus isn't going to come out of Egypt until the king dies. So the king is going to die right before March 21st, or the spring equinox, when the sun overtakes the evil darkness, or when the sun comes out of hiding, which would be Jesus coming to power as the sun god of Pisces, if you want, at that time period in the spring equinox.
And he would be, what, 12 years old or something like that when he...
Not quite yet.
Okay.
What I have to do is incorporate this idea halfway through this idea. So we're going to start the full birth narrative. So we did the birth narrative of Matthew. We're at the winter solstice, okay? And we're going to recognize that the sun is sometimes born December 22nd, which would be Capricorn. Now, Capricorn is opposite Cancer. And this is how we explain how Jesus skips from being an infant to being age 12. And it's simply looking at the function of the goat and the function of the crab. The function is to take you up the mountain. So the function of the goat is to take you up the mountain. The function of the crab is to backslide or to take you back down the mountain. So effectively, we skip around the signs of the zodiac, and through this we'll come to where he comes out of hiding here with the spring equinox we just talked about. So as he comes back up here, he's effectively skipped through the 12 ages of the zodiac. So now he's going to be age 12. And he's going to be missing for 3 days at the winter solstice. And he tells us that he says, "Why is it that you are looking for me? Did you not know I'd be in my father's house?" We earlier discovered that his father's house is Ophiuchus, which the sun is in for 18 days. He's 12. He's in 18 days in Ophiuchus. 12 plus 18 is 30. So that's how we explain how he's now 30. Okay? Now the trick to being here at the winter solstice is that it says in the passage it's the Passover. But he's missing for 3 days. That tells me he's at the winter solstice. So the Passover has to be a clue to what's happening. And if you look at what I described as Capricorn taking you up the mountain and Cancer taking you down, and you get right back to Capricorn, and he's just going to keep doing it, you're going to be in an infinite loop. So if you were to write a computer program and you have an infinite loop, you'd have to put a counter. You'd say, okay, if you do this loop 5 times, stop it and go to Aquarius. Well, that's effectively what they did when they said he's missing for 3 days at the Passover. Passover's not what time of year it is. It's what you're going to do to Capricorn. He's age 30. He's going to pass over. And then he's going to get baptized by John the Baptist or Aquarius. And then we keep looking at the sign opposite. So when the sun is in Aquarius, the opposite sign, Leo, is going to be below the horizon. So now Leo, the king, is in the underworld. He went below the horizon and he's in the underworld. Well, now he's the king of the underworld. He's Satan. So he gets baptized by John the Baptist, then he gets tempted by Satan for 40 days. Now the sun is in Leo for 38 days, you round that up to 40. Now Satan tempts Jesus with bread. If it was crab cakes, it would be really obvious, but because it's bread, he's next to the house of bread, of Virgo. And then after that, he goes to the 2 fishermen, Simon and Andrew, and that's the 2 fish of Pisces. So far, we're able to get to this point. Now,
and it's opposite each one, so it's, this one, then this one, and
right,
we can follow the story along.
That's the key to figuring out what's going on in the story. Okay, so now at this point, when I first started putting this together, I said, okay, if Zeitgeist is going to tell me that Jesus is the sun going around the zodiac, I'm like, well, where the hell is that? Start at the beginning and fill me in. As I started to try to understand this, I could get to this point, and then I could come over here and see, oh, I know what that is, I know what that is, and I know what that is. How do I get here? And it came upon me that in order for me to get from Pisces to Virgo, I was going to need a miracle. And I found one in the Bible. The miracle that we're going to use is the feeding of the 5,000 with 2 fish and 5 loaves. Because as I see that, the feeding of the 5,000 with 2 fish and 5 loaves is simply saying, plant your crops in Pisces, and then harvest over here in Virgo, the house of bread. Now, if we do the math, 2 fish and 5 loaves, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we have a number to put to the idea. When we look at the idea of 5,000, and just because the Revelation has 7 all over it, I say, well, let's divide 5,000 by 7, and the result is 714. And in numerology, 14 is 2 sevens, so 714 to me is 777. It's telling me, wow, man, you're getting it. Okay? So when we get to Virgo, the allegory for the sun being in Virgo is when Mary washes Jesus' feet with her hair. Okay? So, and that happens in sequence before he goes to turn over the money changers, which is going to be Libra. Okay, but now that we've looked at this idea, and I'm sitting here saying, I need permission to skip from Pisces over here to Virgo, we're going to look at Lost Book of Nostradamus, image number 73. And we're looking at 73 because I said 2 plus 5 is 7, and 5,000 divided by 7 is 714, 777. Image number 73 in numerology is 7 times 3, or 777. As we can see in that image, the only thing we can see is that he's dropping something on the ground, and we can see that he's dropping seeds on the ground. Okay, where this gets really interesting is when you change to, you go to the next image, which is image number 74, and we have somebody washing somebody's feet. So I'm able to look at this and make that connection and say, Nostradamus is saying, if you think you got it, you probably do. It's all revelation at that point. 777, the number 7, and we go to the next picture. So we see planning, and then we see washing of the feet. So to me, that's kind of like a way of looking at those pictures, verifying an idea.
And know that you're on the right path and getting, following the map the right way.
Right, and the numbers verify it. I'm sitting there when I see this planning of the crops, the feeding of the 5,000 with the 7 sevens in there. I mean, you could even go to the dates. So if we went to the spring equinox, for example, in the Julian calendar, it would be March 25th. Okay, so March 25th. March is the 3rd month, and 2 and 5 make 7. 25, 7, 3rd month, 777. So if you look at March 21st, not that it would matter in his context, because he was still in the Julian calendar, but you can see 777 all over the place when you do this. Okay, so now to move along, we come to Libra. That's when, after he gets his feet washed by Mary, he's going to go to turn the tables over on the money changers, and that's where you would have the scales. So the scales of Libra represent that. Now we look at Jesus, and it's even, against the law for him to do that. So this is where he's going to set himself up to be the sacrificial lamb of Aries. Okay?
Right.
So now he's the sacrificial lamb based upon this act that just can't be forgiven. They're saying, okay, Jesus has gone over the top, causing people, financial harm by turning over their business. So the next part we get to is the scorpion, which is going to be Judas. Okay? So there's 2 different ways to look at Judas. There's one to look at it purely astrological. So Judas sells Jesus out for 30 pieces of silver. We can look at the number of days the sun would be in Scorpio, and that's 8 days. And then we look at the number of the days it would be in the sign opposite, Taurus, which is 38 days. And basically when we get to this point, I look at it as the Romans playing an astrological joke on the Jews. And one way to do that would be when the sun's in Scorpio, Taurus will be below the horizon or in the dark side. So if you look at the number of days, 8 days for Scorpio, 38 days for Taurus, you would say 38 minus 8 is 30. He's selling out for 30 days in the dark side. He's selling out to the dark side. So that would be one of the ways to look at the allegory. But if we look at the passage talking about Judas, we look that he sells Jesus out for 30 pieces of silver. Then we see he's talking about the field of blood and the blood money. And then we have to get even more detailed to look at how Judas kills himself. In one account, he hangs himself, and in the other account, he bursts forth from his midsection. So I want to cover all that groundwork to say this next allegory, because I'm just going to do it, right? The 30 pieces of silver represent 30 silver moons. 30 silver moons represents a woman's menstrual cycle, which represents pussy. So Judas is effectively selling Jesus out for a piece of ass, and it makes sense astrologically because Scorpio is opposite Taurus, a fertility symbol, so he's going to be opposed by his fertility. He's going to have issues with it. Now, a way to verify this is if we look at the scorpion with his tail raised, he looks like he could hang himself, like a hanger. Now, when we look at the mating ritual of a scorpion, they're going to lock claws and they're going to raise their tails each other. So that's part of this astrological sexual allegory, is we look at the mating ritual of the scorpion, and that raises its tail in this fashion where it's hanging itself. And then the male scorpion, he doesn't have a penis and he doesn't mount the female. what they do is they lock claws, and this female scorpion must be really good at phone sex or dirty talk or something, because after they lock claws, the male is going to burst forth from his midsection.
So he just completely bursts open.
He spills a sperm sac from his midsection.
Does he die or
No.
Okay.
It's just a way to understand
Gotcha.
Judas bursting forth from his midsection in this context, and then the female will come and squat on top of that sperm sac. But the idea is that we can see this conceptual Roman sick joke being played on the Jews, and all the allegory fits. The blood money, the 30 pieces of silver,
Right.
30 silver moons.
You have too many coincidences for it to just be, made up.
Right, you sit there and say, am I trying to force a joke here, or I'm sitting here saying, no, I sat there and watched a video on YouTube of two scorpions having sex and saw them raise their tails because they don't trust each other, so they're in that position where you could hang them by their tail, and then you look at him bursting forth from his midsection, you sit there and you go, there's just, like you say, there's too many things going on here that just tie into saying these sick Roman bastards.
Well, when you remove contradictions, that's when you know you're on the right path.
Right.
Contradiction is either an error or a lie. So
Yeah. Okay, so moving right along, we go into Sagittarius, and he's the archer, and he's going to be the Roman centurion that stabs Jesus when he dies at the winter solstice. And we already saw it died on a cross, placed in a tomb as an allegory, so we won't have to go into detail on that. So now we've got to the crucifixion, or Sagittarius is stabbing him when he's crucified, and then the rest of it, he's going to spend 40 days with 11 disciples. Now it's just simply saying, okay, he's not going to complete the circuit and then have another 3-day missing, 3-day dead, You just when you start to, oh, he's missing for 3 days, is he?
you got to go to the next part of the story.
Yeah, okay, so now what he's going to do is he's going to resurrect, and he's going to spend 40 days with 11 disciples. And then he's going to ascend into his Father's house. So his Father's house is right here in Ophiuchus. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and bye-bye! Going to my daddy's house where the serpents encircle his tomb, and I'll be there for eternal bliss. So now that we've gone through the whole thing, using both sides, explaining what's going on, and you can clearly see that, like you said, we don't have all these contradictions. It's like, okay, we got all the way around the zodiac like 3 times and ended up right where we want to be. So let's look now at him dying at 33. So he dies at the winter solstice. He's in Sagittarius for 33 days and then he dies. So part of the idea that he dies at age 33 is he's in Sagittarius for 33 days and December 21st is the last of the 33 and he dies. The other way we can look at it was with numerology. So in order to complete the circuit to go all the way back here and die at the winter solstice, that's 365 days. So we just take those numbers, 3, 6, and 5. 6 times 5 is 30, plus the 3, 33. Or we can say 6 plus 5 is 11, times 3 is 33. Another way to look at it astrologically would be the sun is in Pisces for 38 days, minus the 5 days it's on the cusp with Aries. 38 minus 5, sun got a Pisces again, dies at 33. So all this numerology, all this astrology, all ties itself in together. So that's why we're going to look at Lost Book of Nostradamus, image number 49 and then 52. So we'll look at 49 first. And this way we can explain what's going on in Matthew's birth narrative, or not Matthew's birth narrative, but in the book of Matthew, it's chapter 27, verse 52-53, and that's where it's the favorite scripture of the atheist, because that's where it says when Jesus was crucified and resurrected, that when Jesus resurrects, so the saints resurrect from their graves and walk the streets of Jerusalem. So that's when people are saying, hey, there's in the Bible that there's zombies walking the streets of Jerusalem, right? And you're like, no historian mentioned that, and I think that would be something of significance. And there should also be about 100 books of the interviews of people finding out what it was like to be dead. But we look at image number 49, and we think 4 and 9 is 2 sevens. So that's where we're going to get the 2-7 part from Matthew's chapter 27. And then we're going to look at picture number 52, which is going to be the 52 part. So hold it there for a second. So what we see here is these 7 tombs. Now, in order to demonstrate what's going on there, I first look at it in an Egyptian context, because nobody doubts that we can put all kinds of different sun god names on each and every one of those tombs. So if we say Ra, Re, Atun, Amun, Horus, Osiris, and Ra Horiakti. So I put 7 names on those tombs. And you sit there and you go, okay, and if I were to tell you that they're all going to resurrect when Horus resurrects, they're all rising from the same tomb. Now we go back and take off all the Egyptian names, and we just put Jesus, Moses, Joseph, Elijah, etc. We just start putting the Old Testament biblical narrative, the Christian, Judeo-Christian names in there, and we say they're all a different version of the sun god. They're all in the same tomb, and that's how they all resurrect from the same tomb. So that one, the rose represents Virgo, and because if you look at a planisphere and you say, where is Virgo in relation to the tomb, Ophiuchus? Well, we'd see in this side, Virgo's to the right. So there's one rose to the right. Here's Virgo to the right, and we look to the other side. Here's Ophiuchus, and here's Virgo to the left. So when you figure out what those symbols mean in the pictures, we're looking to see, okay, the tomb, what's around the tomb, it's Virgo, Virgo is the rose. So when we look at, say, image number 24, once again, we'll look at this image, and this is Virgo, it's the rose. The sickle is Leo. The foot is boots. Right here is the beehive, and that's going to be Cancer. And this happens to be the astronomy for the birth narrative of Luke. So let's look at picture number 52 to demonstrate how the saints... Do you see the saints?
The Florida League.
Yeah. Okay, so we look at the yellow circle, and that's going to be the zodiac. So that's going to be the band of the zodiac. And we look at that tortoise, and the tortoise is going to be... Oh, I had it right there. So the tortoise is below... The tortoise is Lyra, and it's below Ophiuchus, and the fleur-de-lis are going to represent Libra again, the balance symbol. Okay, but what we have to understand here is that when we look at the zodiac, Ophiuchus is over here, and here we have the circle of the zodiac. So over there we have that yellow circle, and outside we have the heart, which is the heart of the galaxy, because it's between Sagittarius and Scorpio where we find Ophiuchus, and that's the alignment with the center of the Milky Way galaxy. So that's the heart of the galaxy, that's the heart of it. So Ophiuchus represents the heart, which represents the tomb, and the fleur-de-lis represent the saints doing what? Coming out of the tomb. So and the numbers match. It's 27:52 in the book of Matthew. 49, the picture of the tombs before, is 2 sevens, and this is picture number 52. So that we're describing it. And if the astronomy fits, we can fit all that together. So another picture we want to look at is number 70. We have the spiral galaxy right in front of the either scorpion or the crab. And to me, it's almost interchangeable. But if we look at the full moon on December 28th, it'll be in the sign of Cancer. So we could look at that kind of necklace looking part of the picture, and that could be a full moon. Okay, but this is telling us something more important, because we look at those 3/4 moons, and the wheel above the 3/4 moons. In the Lost Book of Nostradamus, they demonstrate how it's the Grand Cross and the Mundane Cross, and how that signals right there 2012. Okay, so I'm looking at that picture thinking, what is going on with the moon here at 2012? And so I started researching all the moon cycles, and what I found was that on December 20th, 2012, so the night before the crucifixion, the night before the solstice, that we're in the first quarter moon. And it looks like this picture, which would be a half moon to us. But the part I want to point out is there's another half to the moon. It's the other side that we can't see, and that side's going to be dark-sided. So in essence, we have 2 quarters on this side and another 2 quarters on the other side.
2 halves or 2 quarters?
There's 2 quarters on this half.
Okay.
And then there's another half.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Sorry.
So we're going to divide the moon into 4 quarters, where here we're seeing 1 quarter lit up.
Right, gotcha.
So the moon, which reflects the sun, is denying the sun on 3 quarters or 3 times. And the significance is this happens where the moon is denying the sun 3 times the night before the crucifixion, just like Simon Peter. So if we think of Simon Peter, in one case he's one of the 2 fish of Pisces, but in this case he's Peter the rock. So the earth is the 3rd rock from the sun, and the moon is another rock spinning around the earth. Peter is the moon. This is how he denies Jesus 3 times before the cock crows. Now the significance of that is when we look when Jesus calls Simon Peter Satan. He says, "Get behind me, Satan." Well, the moon is Satan. So if we think of Satan as a character that used to be one of the brightest angels.
So when it goes into a new moon, it's all dark, so then it's fallen to the darkness?
It's fallen to the dark side. So we look at him being the brightest angel, and that would be a full moon, but then it turns to the dark side. So it goes through its moon cycle, and the new moon is going to be Satan. Okay, so we need to look back and say the new moon is dark-sided, and that's Satan. And we say, well, wait a minute, didn't Satan enter Judas? Yeah, that's what it says in the Bible. So we look and say, well, when's the new moon? The new moon is December 13th, 2012. Well, if you want to look up when the moon is in Scorpio, it's also December 13th, 2012. So the same day the moon goes dark-sided, the moon is in Scorpio, Judas. And then we could look at that picture from, the Chartres Cathedral, the Zodiac monthly labors that I showed you the other day. And it's a picture of Scorpio with a serpent entering it. So we see another representation of Satan entering Judas. And so we can see that these ideas go way back until the 1200s.
Confirming the allegory, at least into medieval France, right?
Yes, into medieval France. So
So at least 400 years before Nostradamus.
Exactly. So Nostradamus didn't just figure this all out. When we look at the pictures of the Lost Book of Nostradamus, those are from prior Vaticini's that are different, prior books that they just copied that from. So the Lost Book of Nostradamus didn't draw these pictures. It's more likely he had them in his possession and figured out these things, or
just created a new allegory around it,
which is the quatrains. So some of the quatrains I can link up with that. So now we can see that the moon is Satan. So now we can, and it's based upon us figuring out what this picture tells you to look at the astronomy at the center of at the alignment with the galactic alignment which is the spiral galaxy, and the wheel that the people say is the mundane cross and the grand cross. So that's 2012. So when we see the wheel, we should be thinking 2012. Now let's look at image number 38. So now we see that Simon Peter the rock is the moon, and moon is Satan. So Simon Peter, Satan. And who takes the keys of heaven and represents Simon Peter? The Pope. So here we have the Pope, and he's pointing to that necklace. You see how the Pope is pointing to that necklace that represents the moon in the other picture? So he's telling you, I'm the moon. I'm Satan. Okay? When we look at those characters right there, astrologically, what we're going to have is Draco and Ursa Major. So Draco, the dragon, Satan, is chasing Ursa Major. And if you look how the bear's arms in that picture are up in the air, you can see that right here with Ursa Major. So he's pointing to the moon saying, I'm Satan, and astrologically the character he's representing,
Nostradamus
Draco,
is just poking fun at the Pope and calling the Pope Satan, essentially.
Right. Okay, but when we look at that, remember earlier we talked about Petra Romanus and the prophecy of Saint Malachi.
Okay.
So when I'm reading the book Petra Romanus, there's a section in there where it says that they have figured out from the, say, 1572 that there's going to be 40 more popes. So the prophecy of the popes is thought to go back to Malachi's times in the 1100s, and that there's 111 popes, and after that, no more. But they say, well, this comes along right about the same time as Nostradamus and Robert Estienne, who number-coded the Bible and the Gregorian calendar that we'll see is important in a second. So we see right in the 1500s, we have this prophecy of Malachi. And it says from the time, the way that the book Petra Romanus digested is it says, the book is spurious. It shows up about 1595, and they say, well, the prophecies of a bunch of those popes, that's probably backdated in and phonied up. But from 1572, we have to look at this as being real. And from that time period, they said, there's going to be 40 more popes, and then we'll have no more popes. And they say, when might this happen? And they said, well, the average length of time a pope will be in service is 11 years, and there'll be 40 more popes. So it's 11 times 40, 440, from 1572, that's to 2012. So I'm reading that there's this prophecy of the popes, and these guys have analyzed the numbers, and they're saying in 2012 we'll have the last pope. In the 1500s, how could they figure that out? Well, if they knew that on December 20th that the moon was going to deny the sun 3 times, and that the moon is Satan, and that the Pope is Satan, once we figure that out, we shouldn't have any more popes. So when I look at what Nostradamus is saying, and I look at the Pope being Satan, and then I look at that prophecy of the popes, it'd be like, well, you know, let's just say, for example, everybody thought like me, we'd be thinking that the Pope is Satan, and we're not going to be having that. So that's how I put all those different theories together. So in this part of the presentation, we're going to look at the original quatrain that we were looking at, the 3-94, where it says, for 500 years more, we'll take count of him who was the ornament of his age. And now we're going to figure out who the ornament of his age is, and we're going to think in terms of Ichthus, Jesus Christ, Lord and Savior, Son of God. So we have the acronym Ichthus, which stands for the Jesus fish, which is the Vesca Pisces. Now the reason we want to look at that is because of these numbers. So we look at the ratio of the fish, and we have it as a fraction 265 divided by 153, and the result is 1.73 and change. So we're going to perform some numerology on this to see if we can figure out the number of the beast. Now we're going to say 2, 6, and 5, and we're going to separate the 2 and the 5 and say 5 minus 2 is 3 times 6 is 666. Look at the number 153 and add the 1 and the 5, that's 6, again, times 3, 666. We look at 173, 7 minus 1 is 6, times 3, 666. Okay, now if I go back to quatrain 394, I'm going to perform some math on it too. So I'm going to look at the number 94, and 9 times 4 is 36, which is 666. So 36, 3 sixes, and it's century 3, so quatrain 3-94. Well, we get 9 times 4 is 36, is 666. Quatrain 3, that's 3 different ways to do 666, which we just did there. 173, 666, 265, 66, 153, 666. Now, if I go quatrain 3 times the result of 9 times 4, 36, 3 times 36 is 108. So now I'm going to go to quatrain 108, or 10-8. Quatrain 10-8 reads as follows. With forefinger and thumb, he will moisten the forehead. So we're going to take our forefinger and put it to our thumb, and what we make is a Vesca Pisces. And if I put that onto my forehead and moisten my forehead, I'm going to leave that mark on my forehead. So we just calculated the Vesica Pisces. 3 different ways we come up with 666. I'm able to have that image or mark on my right hand, which I would need to buy and sell in Roman times, because if they cut off my right hand, I'll be labeled a thief and not a good candidate for buying or selling. Now the other way, when you put the other place that you have that on your forehead is on your eyeballs. So the rest of this says, the third line says, through Venus, which is Lucifer, the light bearer, through several of thin foreheads. So when we look at our thin forehead, that's our eyes. That's where we have that mark on our forehead. Okay, so we can see that in the numerology he's talking about that. We used a little numerology with quatrain 3-94, but now we can go directly to quatrain 173. So when I go to quatrain 1-73, the first time I looked at it, I couldn't make anything out of it, skipped right over it, and then after looking at this discovery, I had to go back to quatrain 173, and it reads as follows. France shall be accused of neglect by her 5 partners, Tunis, Algiers, stirred up by the Persians. Lyon, Seville, Barcelona, having failed, they will not have the fleet because of the Venetians. Now, when I read that in a regular fashion, it means nothing to me. But I'm intrigued when I realize that 173 is like 7 and 3 is 777, which is Revelation. When I make a map of these 5 cities, Tunis, Algiers, Lyon, Seville, and Barcelona, I make a map of those 5 cities and break out a protractor, and the 2 circles I draw look like that, the Vesica Pisces. So we look at the number code 173 and the cities mapped out, drawn in 2 circles. So again, we say, well, how about we look at another one where we look at 153? And I'll read from Peter Lemessier's because I like that one better. So out of Peter Lemessier's book, Nostradamus, the Man, the Myth, the Truth, Bibliomancer, in quatrain 153, we get the following. Alas, we shall see a great people tormented, and holy law in utter ruin. To other laws all Christendom shall succumb, once a new source of gold and silver is found. So we're looking at the Jesus fish as being the mark of the beast. We see we have this on our right hand. We see we have this on our forehead, or as he describes, our thin forehead, which is our eyeballs. And then we look at quatrain 153 and it's saying, holy law in utter ruin. And a new source of gold and silver could be the sun, the moon, the stars, the planets. So we're just looking at these as sun worship and astrological allegories.
Fascinating.
To say the least.
But, you know, it's all just coincidence.
Too much coincidence.
You know, have you considered taking all of these discoveries and mapping out the mathematical possibility of that many coincidences? You know, because that would give you a number of, you know, how unlikely it would be that you're incorrect.
Right. It would be astronomical, because if we look at one of the original write-ups or reviews I saw on Joseph Atwell's work, one of the original ones that I saw was that there was 11 allegories in sequence. So Jesus and Titus are both in Galilee, sinking the Jewish fishing vessel and, you know, fishing for men. The original time I saw that wrote up, there was 11 in sequence. And I fully need to investigate that part. Maybe we could get Joe Atwell to give us some feedback on it, because the whole story represents on 11 and 40. And 11 factorials rounded off to 40 million. So they said, what are the odds that Jesus and Titus are performing these 11 events in the same place in the same sequence? And it's 11 factorial, which mathematically calculates to about 40 million. I went way over a million. I mean, way over 11. in the number of times we started at the birth narrative, went around the zodiac, and included all those allegories for Matthew's birth narrative. And so the number would just be astronomical. Going back to the 1140 is Jesus spends 11 or 40 days with 11 disciples. So that's where we see 1140 again. We look back at that prophecy of Malachi, and we had the Pope's going to serve for 11 years, and there's going to be 40 more popes. And then I go back to that Star of David made out of the planets in 5 BC, and the odds of that happening is 40 million to 1, which is the result of 11 factorial. So from the beginning, 40 million, which is 11 factorial, at the Star of David, to the middle, where he's 11 disciples for 40 days, to the end, where he's a 40, how did I mix it? With the middle being Titus and Jesus doing 11 things. So if we could verify with Joe, we could say from the beginning at 5 BC, we have 40 million, which is 11 factorial. When we have the story taking place in Titus's time, we have 11 sequenced events, which is 11 factorial, 40 million. We have this prophecy of Malachi, 11 years service for the Pope times 40 popes, and then we have Jesus with 11 disciples for 40 days. So that kept popping up, but it seemed like originally Joe Atwell or maybe it was is it Hudson, Mark Hudson, did a write-up and said the 11 factorial. And I was hoping when the documentary came out, it said, great, show it to me. Show me all those 11 laid out side by side. And, and then that was like one of the things I didn't, he didn't put into the documentary. And there was no reason why he should, I guess.
In Joe Atwell's documentary?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's in the book.
Where he points out the 11 in sequence? Okay, so yeah.
And he has the math broken down in the book, too. I think it was like 200, his ended up to be like 240 million or something like that.
Yeah, so, but looking at the answer to your question, I would sit there and say, there's too many things happening, and when you connect it with, here's Osiris having the same story of Jesus, and we can show you it's the same astronomy, and, and that's 2012 too. You're sitting there going, are the Egyptians looking at this?
Sure, it's interesting, when you think of these ancient priests and how these guys, at what point did they say this story and this allegory that we pass on to our children? At what point did they say, why don't we just tell them it's real, and then we'll know the truth, and we'll control everybody else with it?
Sure.
At what point did that happen? It's a...
I would speculate from the very beginning because, I look
You don't
at
think
it,
at some point it started as just stories and allegory that were passed down generation after generation to teach people when to take, how to take care of themselves and whatnot?
the way that I look at it is I look at it from that Epic of Gilgamesh is 2,500 plus or minus 100 years, that's the ancient Sumerian Babylonian myth, 2,500 BC. Those same people can be seen to have invented astrology and astronomy 2000 BC. Some people say maybe as early as 3000 BC.
So they created the astrology.
And
It's almost like they created it all at the same time to hide their own story and religion.
Well, yeah, but the point I was going to make is this. We see that the flood story is an astrological allegory. We see that the flood story is an astrological allegory on both sides here. Flood story is an astrological allegory. This flood story is written in 2500 plus or minus BC. They invent astrology, astronomy, 2000 BC. Well, when did the Hebrews write their version of that story? In the Babylonian captivity, 586 BC. So I look at it as saying, who copied from who? Where did this story come from? I'm sitting there going, really? If you look at an astrological allegory for the flood, who cares who copied from who? It's an astrological allegory. But when you realize, wait a minute, the Babylonian, Mesopotamian, Sumerians invent the story in the Epic of Gilgamesh. They're responsible for inventing astrology, astronomy. We see this myth as an astrological allegory. We go, 2,000 to 1,500 years later, in captivity in Babylon, that the Hebrews write the same story that we see as an astrological allegory.
And it's still being used, 2,500 years
Yes.
later to control the masses.
Exactly. So that's how I answer your question. I look at it a little different, but you're like, yeah, how long have they been doing this and who they've been doing it to? And,
Well, they've been doing it to the whole world because obviously the priest class know this stuff. And then they're selling it to the masses, the literal interpretation. Who knows how far up is it, the cardinals or the bishops or whatever, and who knows with the rabbis and how far back that goes, the Cohens and whatnot, because certainly Judaism, Zionism has been tied into all of this stuff going way back too, and they've been attacking each other, calling the other one evil, and working together behind the scenes on stuff at the same time for thousands of years. So,
right. And essentially, their religions come from the same astrological sun worship origins. So there's no dichotomy that they should be having. It should be,
the only dichotomy is what the priest put forth to the people to control the people.
Right. It's underneath the hood, same religion, but outwardly it's being used for manipulation. So
right.
Would be your point. Yeah. One case there would be looking at the Islamic faith, where you go back and say they're feudal, with the Sunnis and the Shiites. They're going back way a long time ago, saying who's originally going to take power. So, well, both you guys are the same thing. Why are you fighting? And it's just a matter of, well, who's the descendant from Muhammad? Who gets to take over power? And it's like, essentially it shouldn't matter. It should be like, if you're both sects of Islam, what should it matter? Yeah.
So let me ask you this. With all of this research, you got to answer the famous question, what is the single most important concept that you want or would like people to take away from this interview and your research on astrotheology and Nostradamus and ancient religion?
Don't trust anyone. Just like the X-Files. If I can sit here and pull out all these astrological allegories, and there's a shitload of people out there saying astrotheology is bullshit, and the main thing that I would say is, once I looked at a planisphere and I could see that the stars were in fact right where they needed to be, where Zeitgeist is saying on December 24th, the brightest star in the night sky, and then I'm sitting here looking at Zeitgeist debunking video after
Chris White's video.
Chris White, the most disgusting one is I was looking at a YouTube video that you can find by going Osiris Jesus. Right. And it's Dr. William Lane Craig, and he says, this is all stuff that comes out of the 1800s, and it's a Jewish reclamation.
For example, Osiris' son Horus has pretty much the exact same bio, and I was wondering how you reconcile your faith and the historical accounts of the time.
I have to say, in all gentleness, that's just based on misinformation. This is garbage that's spread on the internet that just isn't true. And what's really funny about this is that these people who say this kind of thing never seem to quote the primary sources. They tell you that this is in Osiris or Horus, but you never see the primary sources quoted. When you look at the primary sources, you find out they're not at all parallel to the Gospels. And this movement to try to explain Jesus of Nazareth and Christianity against the backdrop of pagan mythology, Greco-Roman and other religions, was very popular back around the late 1800s or so in Germany. And the movement soon collapsed for two reasons. One was that when you examined the primary sources closely, they weren't really parallel. The parallels were spurious. There's nothing comparable, for example, to the resurrection of Jesus in pagan religions.
And my jaw just dropped. I'm sitting there looking, going, hey, man, I can show you how Osiris and Jesus have the same story and the same damn astronomy.
once a year there was a festival of Osiris, and the myth of Osiris is the most ancient myth of Egypt. The festival lasted for about a week and reached its culmination on the last 3 days. And on the first of those 3 days, the earth body of Osiris would be buried. During the second day, vigils in the temple were said for the god's resurrection. And then on the morning of the third day, the statue was brought out into the court through here, and all the pilgrims who have gathered from all over Egypt celebrated the resurrection of Osiris.
How common was that kind of story? Because for me, the story of death and resurrection of a deity emerges with Christianity. So was it common for people to think this way?
Well, in the Nile Valley it was. And in the ancient Near East you also have the myths of the sacrificed savior gods who died for their people and were resurrected, came back to life, and would lead all the righteous souls to salvation and eternal life.
And here's him telling me it's just people picking on the Jews. It's a Jewish reclamation. And then he says, in the book, Come Let Us Reason, Mark Foreman has put together a case where he just dismantles the Zeitgeist movie. So I ended up getting that book, but also on YouTube I found a Mark Foreman video, and he's saying the same thing. This is just bad astronomy. He says that Sirius and the 3 belt stars align almost every night. There's nothing special about that night. Well, I showed earlier the
they align with the rise of the sun, which is particular on Christmas morning and everything, you know.
Yeah. So they all try to look in the morning. They're throwing a deceptive
they take all of our work and they totally distort it. Like I said, Chris White, took our video or our photograph without asking us for his debunking astrotheology video, and totally misrepresented everything that we had said. But here's another thing which I published in, and then we can probably wrap things up here. But I published this in Astrotheology and Shamanism on page 21. In 375 CE, Epiphanius, Bishop of Constantia, described the similarities between Jesus' birth and the pagan winter solstice celebrations. About 1,000 years later, in the 14th century, the Church attempted to censor this evidence, but an original, uncensored copy was later discovered and is presented below. As noted scholar G.R.S. Mead relates on the Epiphanius text, quote, "And here it will be of interest to turn to a curious statement of Epiphanius," and this goes to all of those who say that it was created by Madame Blavatsky and all this ridiculous nonsense, right?
Goes way back.
Way back. It is missing in all editions of this father prior to that of Dendorf of Leipzig University, 1859, which was based on a very early 10th century Codex Marcanius 125, all previous editions being printed from a severely censored and bowdlerized 14th century manuscript. And then from Pinarion of Epiphanius of Salamis, 51.22, 3 through 12, and for the Savior was born during the 42nd year of the Roman Emperor Augustus. For these say as follows, quote, "Christ was born on the 8th before the Ides of January, 13 days before the winter solstice, the Epiphany, and the increase of light of the day. Greeks, I mean the idolaters, celebrate this day on the 8th before the calends of January, which Romans call Saturnalia, Egyptians Chronia, and Alexandrians Cecilia. For this division between the signs of the zodiac, which is a solstice, comes on the 8th before the calends of January, and the day begins to lengthen because the light is receiving its increase. And it completes a period of 13 days until the 8th before the Ides of January, the day of Christ's birth, with a 13th of an hour added to each day. The Syrian sage Ephraim testified to this calculation in his commentary. So now, excuse me if I just caught that correctly, the Syrian sage Ephraim testified to this before Epiphanius, okay, because this is from 375. So Ephraim, before 375, testified to this calculation in his commentaries when he said, quote, "Thus the advent of our Lord Jesus Christ and his birth in the flesh, or a perfect incarnation, which is called the Epiphany, was revealed after a space of 13 days from the beginning of the increase of light. For this 2 must needs be a type of the number of our Lord Jesus Christ and his 12 disciples, since, added to the disciples, he made up the number of the 13 days of the light's increase. And then going on to 22:8, and how many other things have been done and are being done because of and in testimony to this calculation? I mean Christ's birth. Indeed, those who guilefully preside over the cult of idols are obliged to confess a part of the truth, and in many places deceitfully celebrate a very great festival on the very night of the Epiphany, to deceive the idolaters who believe them into hoping in the imposture and not seeking the truth. You know, and it's like, here he is backpedaling after he admits that the whole thing is ancient, celebrated in Egypt, in Rome, the Alexandrians, etc. Then he says, oh, all of that is phony. We just created it. You know, right. Never mind, this is in 375. That stuff is all brand new and fake, right? And it's just this total backpedaling. And well, then
it's also easier to defend the idea to say, well, this is a spurious idea from the 18th century.
Sure. You know,
and it's already been debunked, and scholars refuted it.
So Chris White, he had this website, or has, debunking Zeitgeist, the Zeitgeist Challenge, right? And so I sent him this text. And then what did he do? You know, it's funny is he was on James Corbett's show, and he says, people won't listen. They criticize me for being a Christian. They attack me for being a Christian. Well, I sent him this text years ago. And what did he say? Well, Epiphanius is wrong because he's a Catholic.
Right.
Never mind that it was from 375. So then...
And never mind reading the actual material.
And never mind reading the actual material. And then Chris changed the goal. Okay, so then he moved the goal back to the Zeitgeist Challenge to the 1st century, any document to the 1st century, because of what I sent him, totally debunking him. All right, so continuing, listen to this, 22:9. First at Alexandria, in the Corium, as they call it, it is a very large temple, the shrine of Kore, or Kore. They stay up all night singing hymns to the idol with the flute accompaniment, and after cockcrow, and bring up a wooden image which is seated naked on a litter. It has a sign of the cross inlaid with gold on its forehead, 2 of such signs, one on each hand, and the other signs, one actually of each of us, its 2 knees, altogether 5 signs with gold impress. And they carry the image itself 7 times around the innermost shrine with flutes, tambourines, and hymns, hold a feast, take it back down to its place underground. And what this mystery means, they reply that today is at this hour, Kore, that is, the Virgin, has given birth to the Ao.
Yes.
And so here we have it, to avoid paying me the $1,000 for losing the Zeitgeist Challenge years ago, Chris changed the goal, used an ad hominem attack that Epiphanius was a Catholic. The very same argument that he complained about on James Corbett's show, he used against Epiphanius to avoid paying me and admitting that he was wrong.
Right.
So there you have it.
Yeah.
And so that's a wrap.
Okay.
Would you like to add any final words here?
Thanks for having me. And, I'll tell you people out there, I don't care what you believe. I care why you believe it. And if somebody wants to tell you that the 3 belt stars don't align with Orion on the night before the solstice, run like the freaking plague, man, because they are selling you
a big load.
Big load.
Yep. And it's just ironic that White happens to run a church, but there's no agenda there, folks. Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot.